The classroom fell silent when Lieutenant Danny Martinez walked through the door. 42 students from 17 different species sat in their assigned seats, but the arrangement told a story all by itself. On the left side of the room, the predator species clustered together. Sharp teeth, strong claws, and hunting eyes marked them as dangerous. On the right side, the prey species huddled close to each other. Soft fur, nervous movements, and wide eyes showed their constant fear. Danny had seen this pattern before. Every classroom in the Galactic Integration Academy looked the same. Predators on one side, prey on the other, and a wide empty space between them that nobody dared to cross. The Academy called it integration, but Danny called it what it really was: separation with a fancy name. He placed his teaching tablet on the desk and looked at his students. Most of them avoided his eyes. Humans confused the other species. Earth was classified as a death world, one of the most dangerous planets in known space. That should have made humans predators. But humans ate plants too. They kept animals as friends. They cried at sad stories. The galaxy did not know what to do with a species that fit neither category. In the back corner, a young Vectar named Kresh sat alone. He was 7 feet tall with dark scales that caught the light. His claws retracted into his fingers, but everyone knew they were there. 3 seats remained empty around him on all sides. Nobody wanted to sit near a Vectar. His species had joined the Galactic Coalition only 3 years ago. Before that, they had been known as the apex predators of the Outer Rim. Stories of Vectar hunts still frightened children across 100 worlds. Kresh kept his head down and his shoulders hunched. He tried to make himself smaller, less threatening. Danny had read his file. Top scores in mathematics and spatial reasoning. Fluent in 4 languages. Volunteered for every community service project on his home world. None of that mattered to the other students. They saw his claws and remembered the old stories. On the prey side of the room, a Mercian student named Tylee sat with her friends. Her species looked like earth deer but stood on 2 legs. Soft white fur covered her body and blue bioluminescent patterns ran down her arms. Those patterns glowed brighter when she felt strong emotions. Right now they flickered with anxiety as she glanced toward the predator side of the room. Danny tapped his tablet and a list of names appeared on the wall screen. The students leaned forward to read it. Then the room erupted in noise. Partner assignments for the next project. Random pairings. Predator with prey. Prey with predator. The impossible made mandatory. A Renthi student shot to his feet. His species had long ears and powerful back legs built for running. He pointed at the screen with a shaking hand. "This cannot be allowed," he said, his voice high and tight. "Coalition law protects our right to feel safe. You cannot force us to work with predators." Other prey species students joined in. Voices rose in protest. Tylee stared at the screen where her name sat next to Kresh's. Her bioluminescent patterns flashed bright white with pure terror. Partnered with a Vectar, it was her worst nightmare made real. Danny let them talk for 30 seconds. Then he raised his hand. The students fell silent, more from shock than obedience. Human instructors rarely interrupted prey species protests. "I understand your fear," Danny said. His voice stayed calm and even. "Your instincts tell you that predators are dangerous. Millions of years of evolution built those instincts. They kept your ancestors alive." He walked toward the back of the room. Students tracked his movement. Danny stopped next to Kresh's desk. The young Vectar tensed but did not move. "Humans evolved as predators," Danny continued. "We hunted other animals for food. We chased prey until they collapsed from exhaustion. This hunting method was called persistence hunting. We were not the fastest or strongest, but we never gave up." He placed his hand on the desk next to Kresh's massive clawed hand. The size difference was obvious. Kresh could tear Danny apart in seconds. Every student in the room knew it. But Danny's expression never changed. "My ancestors hunted wolves," Danny said. "Big predators with sharp teeth and pack hunting strategies. We should have been enemies forever. But humans made a different choice. We fed the wolves. We shared our fires with them. Over thousands of years, wolves became dogs. Now dogs are our best friends. They live in our homes and play with our children." Danny pulled out his tablet and showed them a picture. A small human child hugged a large dog. Both of them were smiling. "Humans also domesticated cats," he continued. "Obligate carnivores that must eat meat to survive. We invited them into our homes anyway. We domesticated horses, which are prey animals. We raised cattle and sheep. protecting them from other predators. We learned to work with both predators and prey because we chose cooperation over instinct. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of students from both sides. Earth's history was violent. Humans fought each other for thousands of years. We divided ourselves by appearance, by belief, by territory. We created weapons that could destroy our entire world, but we also learned to stop fighting. We built cities where former enemies lived side by side. We created laws that protected the weak from the strong. We chose civilization over savagery. Danny sat down in the chair next to Kresh. The young Vectar's eyes widened in surprise. No instructor had ever sat this close to him. The choice was never easy, Danny said quietly. Instinct is powerful. Fear is real. But choice is stronger than instinct. Consciousness is stronger than programming. Every species in this room has the power to choose their actions regardless of their biology. He stood and walked to the door. The students watched him, confused about what would happen next. Danny pressed a button on his wrist device. A soft click echoed through the room as the door locked. Security lights shifted from green to red. The windows darkened automatically. The room's environmental controls kicked in, maintaining perfect temperature and air quality. But nobody could enter or leave. Danny turned to face his students. Some of the prey species looked ready to panic. Chili's bioluminescent patterns flashed rapid white pulses. Her hands gripped the edge of her desk so hard her knuckles showed through her fur. "We have 3 hours," Danny said. "In that time, you will complete your first partnered assignment. You will work together. You will talk to each other. You will learn that instinct can be overcome by choice." A Crescent student raised her tentacle. Her species had no predators on their homeworld. They lived in peaceful ocean cities and never learned fear until they met other species. "What if we refuse?" she asked. Danny smiled. It was not a cruel smile, but it was firm. "Then you will sit here in silence for 3 hours," he said. "But the door will not open until time is up. You cannot run from this. You cannot avoid it. The only way forward is through." He returned to his desk and sat down. The room remained frozen in shocked silence. Danny opened his tablet and began reviewing lesson notes as calm as if he taught a normal class. Tylee looked at Kresh across the empty space between their desks. The young Vectar looked back at her, then quickly looked away. He pulled his hands off the desk and tucked them against his body, hiding his claws. The gesture was small, but Tylee noticed it. The clock on the wall began its countdown. 3 hours stretched ahead like an eternity. 42 students sat in a locked room. Predators and prey forced together with nowhere to run. Danny watched them all and waited to see what they would choose. The first 15 minutes passed in complete silence. 42 students sat frozen in their seats, afraid to move or speak. The locked door seemed to press down on them like a physical weight. Tilly kept her eyes fixed on her desk surface, but she could feel Kresh's presence 3 seats away. Every breath he took sounded loud in the quiet room. Danny finally stood up and began walking between the rows of desks. His footsteps echoed softly on the floor. He carried his tablet and occasionally glanced at his notes, but mostly he watched his students. "The assignment is simple," he said. "Each pair will design a theoretical space station that could house both your species. You must solve problems of atmosphere, gravity, temperature, and diet. You must create spaces where both partners feel safe and comfortable. You have 3 hours to create a basic design." He stopped next to a pair near the front. A Zenthi predator sat 4 feet from a Polis prey species. Neither of them had moved since the door locked. "You can stay silent for 3 hours if you choose," Danny said. "But you will not pass this class without completing the assignment. And you cannot complete it without talking to your partner." He moved on, leaving the pair to make their choice. Slowly, painfully, a few voices began to speak. Quiet at first, careful. Students discussed technical details while avoiding eye contact. The work gave them something to focus on besides their fear. Tylee gathered her courage and pulled out her tablet. Her hands shook as she opened the assignment file. She needed to move closer to Kresh to work together, but her body refused to cooperate. Every instinct screamed at her to run from the predator. Kresh noticed her struggle. He had been watching her from the corner of his eye, trying not to make her more afraid. He knew what he was, knew how others saw him. The loneliness of being feared had become his constant companion since arriving at the academy. He made a decision. Slowly, carefully, Kresh stood up. Tilly's bioluminescent patterns flashed bright white in alarm. But instead of moving toward her, Kresh moved away. He picked up his tablet and his datapad, then walked to the far corner of the room. He set his materials on a desk there and sat down with his back to Tylee. "I will work from here," he said, his voice deep but gentle. "We can share our screens wirelessly. You do not have to come near me." The offer surprised everyone within hearing distance. Tilly felt something shift inside her chest. The predator was trying to make her comfortable. He was sacrificing his own convenience to reduce her fear. The gesture was small, but it meant everything. "Thank you," she said quietly. Her voice barely carried across the room. They connected their tablets and began sharing data. The assignment appeared on both screens. Kresh started entering information about Vector environmental needs, temperature ranges, atmospheric composition, gravity preferences. He worked efficiently, his clawed fingers surprisingly graceful on the tablet controls. Tilly added her species requirements. The differences became obvious immediately. Vector preferred hot, dry environments. Mercy needed cooler temperatures and higher humidity. Vector thrived in heavy gravity. Mercy evolved in light gravity and would struggle with stronger pull. "This will be difficult," Tylee said. "Yes," Kresh agreed, "but not impossible. Most stations use zone systems. Different sections maintain different conditions. They fell into a working rhythm." Kresh suggested technical solutions using his species' advanced engineering knowledge. Tilly refined the designs with her people's artistic sensibility and attention to comfort. Neither acknowledged it directly, but they worked well together. Danny circulated through the room, watching other pairs begin their work. Progress was slow everywhere. Fear did not disappear just because a door locked, but conscious effort was being made. Students who had never spoken before were sharing ideas. Small bridges were being built across millions of years of evolutionary divide. An hour passed. Then another. The room grew warmer as so many bodies shared the space. Some students removed their outer layers. Others adjusted their seats for comfort. The initial panic had faded into cautious tolerance. Tylee reached for her water container and knocked it off the desk by accident. It clattered across the floor, rolling toward Kresh's corner. Every eye in the room turned to watch. The container stopped at Kresh's feet. He looked down at it, then at Tylee. She had frozen in place, her patterns flickering with renewed anxiety. Kresh understood the moment. Everyone was watching to see what the predator would do. He reached down slowly, keeping all his movements visible and predictable. His large hand wrapped around the small container. He stood, and for a moment his full height reminded everyone why Vector were feared. 7 feet of muscle and claw and predatory evolution. But instead of approaching Tilly, Kresh set the container on the desk between them. Not on her desk where he would need to get close. Not keeping it for himself. Exactly in the middle where she could retrieve it safely. Then he returned to his corner and sat back down. "You dropped this," he said simply. Tylee stared at the water container for a long moment. Then she stood and walked to the desk. Her legs felt shaky, but she made herself move. She picked up the container and looked at Kresh across the room. He was deliberately focused on his tablet, giving her space and time to process. "Thank you," she said again. This time her voice was stronger. Something changed in that moment. Tilly had watched Kresh have the perfect opportunity to frighten her. His instincts could have driven him to approach, to dominate, to assert his predatory nature. Instead, he chose to give her control. He chose to respect her fear even though it meant isolating himself further. Other students had noticed too. Quiet conversations started around the room. If the Vector could control himself, maybe other predators could too. If the Mercine could watch a predator handle her property without panicking, maybe prey species could learn to trust. Danny smiled from his desk but said nothing. The students were learning the lesson he could not teach directly. Choice was more powerful than instinct. Consideration was more important than capability. Trust had to be earned through consistent action. With 30 minutes remaining, Tylee made a decision. She picked up her tablet and stood. Her friends from the prey side of the room watched with wide eyes as she walked across the space toward Kresh's corner. Each step felt like a battle against her own biology. She stopped 3 feet from his desk, close enough to see his screen, far enough to feel safe. Kresh tensed but did not move. "The common areas," Tilly said, her voice only slightly shaky. "If we make them modular, both species could use the same spaces at different times. We would not need to double everything." Kresh looked at his screen, considering her suggestion. His analytical mind worked through the problem. "Smart thinking," he said. "We could use temporal sharing schedules. automatic environmental adjustments between uses that would save significant construction resources. They worked together for the final half hour, not as close as most partners, but closer than they had started. Tilly found herself focusing on the problem instead of her fear. Kresh's suggestions were intelligent and practical. He listened to her ideas with genuine respect. When the timer finally reached 0, Danny stood and unlocked the door. The security lights shifted from red to green. Students looked at the exit with relief, but nobody rushed for it. Something had changed during those 3 hours. "Submit your preliminary designs by tomorrow morning," Danny said. Dismissed. Students gathered their belongings and filed out slowly. Tilly paused at the door and looked back. Kresh was still sitting in his corner, waiting for everyone else to leave first. He always did that. Always made sure he would not crowd anyone in the hallways. For the first time, Tilly saw the loneliness in that gesture. She saw the careful way he moved to avoid frightening others. She saw the cost of being feared through no fault of his own. She raised one hand in a small wave. Kresh looked surprised, then carefully waved back. It was a tiny gesture of acknowledgement between two beings who should have been enemies. But it was a beginning. 2 weeks had passed since the locked room exercise. The change in Danny's classroom was subtle but real. Students still separated themselves by species, but the gap between predator and prey sides had narrowed. Conversations happened more easily. Eye contact lasted longer. The constant tension had eased into cautious coexistence. Tilly and Kresh met 3 times each week to work on their project. They had developed an unspoken rhythm. Tilly would arrive at the study room first and choose her seat. Kresh would arrive 5 minutes later and sit across the table, always maintaining distance. They would work for 2 hours, then leave separately. It was not friendship, but it was progress. On the 15th day, everything changed. Danny's class gathered in the training facility for their scheduled exercise. The large room was designed to simulate emergency situations. Today's drill would test their ability to evacuate during a station crisis. The briefing was simple. Hull breach in Sector 7. Power failure throughout the facility. Navigate to the safe zone using emergency procedures. The students divided into their usual groups. Predator species clustered together, their enhanced senses already scanning for threats. Prey species formed tight protective circles, seeking safety in numbers. Danny watched from the control room above, his finger hovering over the start button. The alarm began without warning, loud piercing designed to trigger stress responses. The lights cut out instantly, plunging the facility into complete darkness. Emergency lighting had been disabled for this drill. The students would need to navigate by touch and memory alone. Panic exploded through the room. Prey species students cried out in fear. Predator species students responded to the sounds with instinctive alertness. In the darkness, everyone became a threat. Nobody could see who stood next to them. Biology took over where consciousness ended. Tilly had been near the center of her group when the lights died. Now she was surrounded by moving bodies and frightened sounds. Someone bumped into her hard, spinning her around. She lost her sense of direction immediately. Her bioluminescent patterns flared bright white, but they only made her a target in the darkness. She pressed herself against a wall, trying to avoid the crush of students rushing toward where they thought the exit should be. Her breathing came fast and shallow. This was exactly the situation her species feared most. Trapped in darkness with predators nearby, every nightmare her people told their children had come true. Kresh stood frozen 20 feet away. His Vector eyes saw everything. The darkness meant nothing to his species. He watched the chaos unfold with perfect clarity. He could see students stumbling into walls, could see prey species grouping together for protection, could see the predator species trying to help but causing more fear with every movement. His instincts screamed at him. So much movement. So many fear signals. His predatory nature wanted to chase, to hunt, to respond to the prey behavior with attack responses. He forced himself to stay still, counting his breaths, fighting against millions of years of evolution. Then he saw Tilly. She was separated from her group and pressed against the far wall. Her patterns flickered wildly, broadcasting her terror to anyone who could see. A large Grundar student stumbled toward her, not seeing her in the darkness. The collision would hurt her badly. Kresh made a decision. He moved through the darkness with practiced silence. His training allowed him to avoid the other students even in the chaos. He reached Tilly just before the Grundar student would have crashed into her. Tylee, he said quietly, his voice cutting through her panic. It is Kresh, you are safe. She gasped and spun toward his voice. Her patterns flashed even brighter. Every instinct told her to run from the predator's voice in the darkness. But something stopped her. The tone of his voice. The careful way he announced himself. The fact that he was speaking to her instead of simply acting. I can see in the dark, Kresh continued. His voice stayed calm and steady despite the strain he felt. I can guide you to the exit if you trust me, but I will not touch you. I will only describe the path. Tylee's mind raced. She was trapped in darkness with a Vectar predator. This should be her worst fear realized. But she remembered the water container. Remembered how he moved away to give her space. Remembered 2 weeks of careful respect and professional partnership. She had a choice. Follow her instincts and stay frozen in terror, or trust the predator who had shown her only consideration. Yes, she whispered. Please help me. Kresh felt relief flood through him. He began describing the room layout. 3 feet forward. Turn left 5 feet straight. Watch for the support beam. His voice never rose above a calm speaking tone. Each direction was clear and simple. Tylee followed his instructions. She could not see him, but she could hear him moving parallel to her path. He stayed close enough to guide, but far enough to give her space. Occasionally his voice would warn her about obstacles. Students rushing past, equipment in the path, uneven flooring. The journey to the exit took 3 minutes but felt like hours. Every second tested Kresh's control. The scent of fear pheromones filled his nostrils. The sounds of prey species panic triggered his hunting instincts. His claws kept extending and retracting involuntarily, but he kept his voice steady and his directions clear. They reached the safe zone entrance together. Emergency lighting marked the doorway with soft blue glow. Tylee stumbled through into the lighted area and turned around. Kresh stood at the threshold, still in the darkness. His breathing was heavy and his hands shook slightly. Other students began emerging from the training area. They saw Tylee and Kresh standing near each other at the exit. Saw the Mercine safe and the Vectar maintaining careful distance. Whispers began spreading through the group. Danny watched from the control room. He had seen everything through the facility's infrared cameras. Had watched Kresh fight his own nature to help a prey species student. Had watched Tylee choose trust over instinct. This was the breakthrough he had hoped for but could never force. The drill ended when all students reached safety. Danny descended from the control room to address them. But before he could speak, a Renthi student stepped forward. I saw them, the Renthi said, pointing at Tylee and Kresh. The predator helped the prey student, in the darkness, when instinct should have been strongest. Other students began sharing their observations. A Crescent student had heard Kresh's calm voice guiding Tylee. A Zenthi predator had noticed how Kresh maintained distance despite his obvious strain. The story spread quickly through the group. Tylee looked at Kresh. He had moved to his usual position at the edge of the group, trying to be invisible. She saw the exhaustion in his posture, saw the slight tremor in his hands that he tried to hide. She understood suddenly the cost of what he had done. Fighting instinct was not easy for predator species either. She walked over to him. The other students fell silent watching this interaction. Tylee stopped closer than she ever had before. Close enough that Kresh could have reached her easily. Close enough that her trust was obvious to everyone watching. Thank you, she said clearly. You kept me safe when I was most vulnerable. I will not forget that. Kresh looked at her with surprise. Nobody had ever thanked him for showing restraint before. His throat felt tight with unexpected emotion. You trusted me, he said quietly. That took more courage than anything I did. Danny watched his students process this moment. Prey species students looking at Kresh with something other than fear. Predator species students seeing that their restraint was noticed and valued. The foundation of real cooperation being built through genuine crisis and genuine choice. The class returned to the main building in small groups. The separation between predator and prey sides was less distinct now. Some students walked together regardless of species. Others maintained distance but with less tension. The locked room had started the process. The emergency drill had proven it could work under pressure. That night, Kresh sat alone in his quarters and finally allowed himself to shake. The effort of maintaining control had been immense, but it had been worth it. For the first time since joining the academy, someone had seen him as more than a predator. Someone had trusted him despite his nature. Tylee sat in her own room processing what had happened. She had been more afraid in that darkness than at any point in her life. But Crash had proven that choice was stronger than instinct. She had learned that trust could be earned even across the deepest evolutionary divides. The lesson would change everything about how she saw the galaxy. News of the emergency drill spread through the academy within hours. By the next morning, every instructor knew about the Vector who guided the Mercine student through darkness. By afternoon, academy administrators were discussing whether Danny's methods were brilliant or dangerous. By evening, formal complaints had been filed. A group of 12 prey species students and their families demanded immediate action. They argued that forcing proximity between predators and prey violated coalition safety protocols. They cited ancient laws designed to protect vulnerable species from discrimination and harm. Their legal arguments carried significant weight. The academy had no choice but to investigate. 3 days after the drill, Danny received a summons to appear before the review board. His teaching methods would be examined, his decisions questioned. The future of integrated training depended on how well he could defend his approach. Danny sat in his quarters the night before the hearing, reviewing his notes. He had expected this conflict eventually. Change always faced resistance, especially change that challenged fundamental beliefs about safety and nature. He was not worried about his own career. He was worried about his students. Kresh and Tylee had become symbols of something larger than themselves. If the board ruled against integrated training, the message would echo across the entire coalition. Predator and prey species should remain separate. Biology determined destiny. Fear was more important than cooperation. The hearing took place in the Academy's formal chamber. 5 board members sat at a raised platform. Academy administrators filled the seats behind them. Danny stood alone at the center podium, facing questions about every decision he had made. The lead investigator was a Hestran named Administrator Vel. His species evolved without natural predators and maintained strict separation policies on their homeworlds. He looked at Danny with obvious disapproval. Lieutenant Martinez, Vel began. You locked 42 students in a room for 3 hours. Students who included both predator and prey species. Students who expressed fear and discomfort. Can you explain why you felt this action was necessary? Danny kept his voice calm and professional. The students needed to learn that proximity does not equal danger. The conscious choice can override instinct. They could not learn this lesson while maintaining comfortable distance. But you endangered them, another board member interjected. Predator species have documented attack histories. What if instinct had overwhelmed one of them? I was present the entire time, Danny replied. I monitored every student. The room had emergency protocols available. But more importantly, I trusted my students to choose their actions consciously. The questioning continued for an hour. Danny defended each decision with data and observations. He explained his reasoning. He showed examples of improved cooperation in his classroom. But he could see skepticism on most of the board members' faces. Then Administrator Vel asked his final question. Do you believe the emergency drill was appropriate? Placing students in darkness where predator species had significant advantage? Before Danny could answer, the chamber doors opened. Tilly walked in, followed by a small group of students from Danny's class. They moved to the witness section without being summoned. Tilly's bioluminescent patterns showed determination, not fear. Administrator Vel looked surprised. This is an official hearing. Students were not called to testify. We request permission to speak, Tylee said clearly. This hearing concerns our education and our experiences. We deserve to be heard. The board members conferred briefly. They could not legally refuse student testimony in matters affecting student welfare. Vel nodded reluctantly. Tylee approached the witness podium. Her hand shook slightly, but her voice remained steady. My name is Tilly. I am Mercine. My species evolved as prey animals on a world with 17 different predator species. Fear is our survival instinct. It has kept us alive for millions of years. She paused, gathering her thoughts. When Lieutenant Martinez locked us in that room, I was terrified. When he partnered me with Kresh, I thought I would die. Every instinct I possessed screamed danger. My family told me to refuse the assignment. The board members leaned forward, listening intently. But Lieutenant Martinez taught me something important, Tylee continued. Instinct is powerful, but it is not destiny. I can feel fear and still choose my actions. I learned that a Vector predator can be kind, can be patient, can sacrifice his own comfort to make others feel safe. She looked directly at Administrator Vel. During the emergency drill, I was trapped in complete darkness. Crash found me. He could have done anything. His instincts were surely screaming at him just as mine were screaming at me. But he chose to help me instead. He guided me to safety using only his voice. He never touched me. He respected my fear even while fighting his own nature. Tylee's patterns glowed with intensity. If you shut down this program, you tell every prey species student that we are too weak to overcome our programming. You tell every predator species student that we will never trust them regardless of their choices. You make fear more important than cooperation. You choose separation over civilization. She stepped down from the podium. The chamber remained silent for a moment. Then Kresh stood from where he had been sitting in the back corner. He walked forward with his usual careful movements, making himself visible and predictable. Administrator Vel watched the Vectar approach with obvious discomfort. Kresh noticed but did not react. He took the witness position and looked at the board members with his predatory eyes. "My name is Kresh," he said, his deep voice filling the chamber. "I am Vectar. My species hunted for survival for millions of years. We have sharp claws, enhanced senses, and instincts that tell us to chase anything that runs. These things are part of my biology. I cannot change them." He held up his hands, showing his retracted claws. "But biology is not the only thing I am. I have a mind that can reason, a consciousness that can choose, a desire to be more than my evolution." Kresh's voice carried emotion now. "Do you know what it feels like to be feared everywhere you go? To have people cross the street when they see you? To sit alone in every classroom because nobody wants to be near you? Not because of anything you did, but because of what you might do." The chamber was absolutely silent. Several board members looked uncomfortable. "Lieutenant Martinez gave me something no one else has," Kresh continued. "He gave me the opportunity to prove that I am more than my instincts. He trusted me to make the right choices. And when I did, someone finally noticed. Someone finally saw me as an individual instead of a category." He looked at Tylee, who stood near the witness section. "During that emergency drill, every instinct I have told me to respond to the fear around me. The scent of prey panic triggered responses I have spent years learning to suppress. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, maintaining control in that situation." Kresh turned back to the board. "But I did maintain control, because Lieutenant Martinez taught me that I could. Because Tylee trusted me despite her fear. If you end this program, you tell predator species students that we will never be trusted. That we should stop trying. That we should accept isolation as our permanent condition." He stepped down from the podium. Other students from Danny's class came forward one by one. A Zenthi predator described learning to move carefully around prey species. A Crescent prey student explained how she learned that size did not equal danger. A Paulus student talked about friendships forming across evolutionary divides. The testimonies lasted 2 hours. When the final student finished speaking, Administrator Vel looked troubled. The other board members conferred in quiet voices. Finally, they called a recess to deliberate. Danny stood outside the chamber with his students. Tylee and Kresh stood closer together than they had in the classroom. Other students from both predator and prey species formed a mixed group around them. The separation that had seemed so natural weeks ago now looked artificial. After 3 hours, the board recalled everyone to the chamber. Administrator Vel looked tired, but his expression had softened slightly. "This board has reviewed all testimony and evidence," he announced. "We have also received communication from coalition military observers who witnessed the emergency drill through facility cameras. They have requested permission to study Lieutenant Martinez's methods for potential implementation in joint military training." He paused, looking at Danny. "The board rules that integrated training will continue under strict observation. Lieutenant Martinez will develop a formal curriculum that other instructors can follow. His classroom will serve as a pilot program for expanded implementation across the academy." Relief flooded through the chamber. Students embraced each other regardless of species. Danny felt the weight lift from his shoulders. This was more than a personal victory. This was the beginning of real change, but the real moment came after the hearing ended. Tylee approached Kresh in the hallway. Other students watched as the Mercine stood directly in front of the Vectar with no space between them. She extended her hand in the human gesture of respect. Kresh looked at her offered hand for a long moment. Then very carefully he extended his own hand and gently clasped hers. Predator and prey, choosing connection over separation, the image would spread across the academy and beyond. 3 months had passed since the board hearing. The academy transformed slowly but surely. 6 additional instructors adopted integrated training methods. 20 new classrooms mixed predator and prey species students. The separation that had seemed permanent was starting to crack. Today was different. Today, representatives from 17 coalition military branches would observe a comprehensive demonstration. Success would mean expanding the program across all military academies. Failure would end the experiment forever. Danny stood in the observation deck overlooking the training facility. Below, his original 42 students prepared for a complex tactical scenario. Mixed teams of predator and prey species would navigate a simulated rescue mission, requiring perfect cooperation. The observers filled the deck behind him, skeptical voices discussing the impossibility of what they were about to see. Commander Helric, a military leader from the Zenthi Empire, stood beside Danny. His species was pure predator, evolved from pack hunters who dominated their world. He watched the mixed teams with obvious doubt. "This cannot work in real combat conditions," Helric said. "When danger arrives, instinct takes over. Your students may cooperate in controlled environments, but genuine crisis will reveal the truth." Danny did not argue. Words meant nothing now. Only results mattered. He activated the scenario and watched his students begin their mission. The first phase went smoothly. Teams navigated obstacle courses using each species' strengths. Predator students used enhanced senses to detect hidden dangers. Prey students solved technical puzzles with analytical precision. Observers noted the cooperation but remained unconvinced. Then everything went wrong. A safety system malfunctioned deep in the training facility. What should have been simulated fire became real flames. Automated containment systems failed to respond. Emergency alarms blared, but the doors remained locked. The scenario had become genuinely dangerous. Danny rushed to the control panel. His fingers flew across the interface, but nothing responded. The automated systems had frozen. Below, real smoke began filling the training area. Temperature gauges showed heat rising rapidly. His students were trapped. The observers erupted into chaos. Demands to abort the demonstration. Accusations about safety protocols. Calls for immediate evacuation. Danny ignored them all. He grabbed his emergency communicator and opened a channel to the training area. "All students, this is a genuine emergency," he said, keeping his voice calm despite his racing heart. "Follow your training. Work together. Trust your teammates." Inside the training facility, Kresh smelled the smoke before anyone else. His Vectar senses detected the chemical difference between simulated and real fire immediately. He looked around at his mixed species team and saw confusion turning to panic. "This is real," he announced, his voice cutting through the alarm noise. "We need to evacuate now." Tylee stood near him, her bioluminescent patterns flickering orange with stress. Around them, the other students looked to Kresh for leadership. 3 months ago, prey species students would never follow a predator's commands. Now they waited for his direction. "Stay calm," Kresh said, his natural command presence emerging. "Predator species, use your enhanced senses to navigate. Prey species, stay close and help each other. We move as teams, not individuals." He turned to Tylee. "Can you coordinate the prey species students? They trust you more than they trust me." Tylee felt fear threatening to overwhelm her. Real danger, real fire. Every instinct screamed to run without thinking. But she looked at Kresh and saw confidence in his eyes. He believed she could do this. She chose to believe it too. "Everyone listen," she called out, her voice surprisingly steady. "Form into your assigned teams. Predator species take point. Prey species follow directly behind. If anyone panics, we all die." The students organized quickly. 3 months of training overrode their fear. Kresh led the first group with Tylee right behind him. A Zenthi predator led the second team with a Crescent prey student managing communications. A Renthi prey student worked alongside a Grundar predator to create a third team. Smoke filled the corridors rapidly. Visibility dropped to nearly zero. The predator species students guided their teams using enhanced senses. Their voices stayed calm, giving clear directions. The prey species students fought their instincts and followed those voices into darkness. They reached the first obstacle quickly. A sealed door blocked their path. The electronic lock had failed when the system crashed. Kresh examined it with his keen eyesight while Tylee pulled out her tablet and accessed the facility blueprints. "Manual override," she said, pointing to a panel. "But it requires 3 different access codes entered simultaneously." A Polis student stepped forward. His species had natural mathematical abilities. I can calculate the code sequences if someone can read the panel numbers clearly. Kresh leaned close to the panel, his enhanced vision cutting through the smoke. He read off numbers rapidly. The Polis student computed. A Hestron prey student entered the codes. 3 species working in perfect synchronization. The door opened. They moved through and sealed it behind them, buying time against the spreading fire. The pattern repeated at each obstacle. Predator senses detected dangers. Prey analytical skills solved technical problems. Each species contributed their evolutionary gifts while compensating for others' weaknesses. In the observation deck, the military representatives watched in stunned silence. Commander Helrick leaned forward, his doubts crumbling with each coordinated action. The students moved like a single organism despite being pulled from 17 different species across the galaxy. They are not fighting their instincts, Helrick said quietly. They are using them, channeling them toward cooperation instead of conflict. Danny nodded. Humans learned this lesson over thousands of years. We did not eliminate our tribal instincts. We expanded our definition of tribe to include everyone. These students are learning the same lesson in months instead of millennia. Below, the students reached the final evacuation point. Heat had risen to dangerous levels. Several prey species students showed signs of heat exhaustion. The predator species students supported them physically, while the prey species students navigated the final technical challenges. Kresh and Tylee worked side by side at the emergency exit controls. His strength forced open damaged panels. Her technical knowledge rerouted power to the doors. Around them, students from both predator and prey species supported each other without hesitation. The exit door finally opened. Cool air rushed in from outside. Students poured through into safety, helping each other cross the threshold. Emergency teams waited outside with medical support. Every student was accounted for. Nobody had been left behind. The observation deck erupted in amazed conversation. What they had witnessed went against everything the galaxy believed about predator-prey relationships. But the evidence was undeniable. Mixed species cooperation had worked under genuine life-threatening pressure. Commander Helrick turned to Danny. How long to train a military unit to this level? Danny considered carefully. 3 months for basic cooperation. 6 months for this level of integration. But it requires commitment from all participants. Predator species must learn restraint. Prey species must learn trust. Both sides must choose cooperation over comfort. Another observer spoke up. What makes humans qualified to teach this? Danny smiled slightly. Humans are not special. We are not stronger or smarter than other species. But Earth's history forced us to learn these lessons the hard way. We fought each other for thousands of years before choosing cooperation. We built weapons that could destroy our world before deciding to save it. We created divisions based on appearance before learning to see past them. He gestured toward the students outside. We failed more times than we succeeded. Made every mistake possible, but we learned that survival requires transcending instinct through conscious effort. That lesson is humanity's contribution to the galaxy. Not superiority, but hard-won wisdom about the cost of division and the value of unity. The observers spent hours questioning Danny about curriculum, training methods, and implementation strategies. They reviewed footage of the emergency evacuation repeatedly. By evening, every military branch had committed to pilot programs. 6 weeks later, Danny stood in a different classroom watching a different group of students. Tylee and Kresh stood at the front as assistant instructors. Around them, 40 new students sat in the familiar divided pattern. Predators on one side, prey on the other, empty space between them. Tylee began the introduction. Her confidence transformed from 3 months earlier. Welcome to integrated training. Over the next months, you will learn that biology does not determine destiny. That conscious choice is stronger than instinct. That trust can bridge any evolutionary divide. Kresh pulled up the assignment list on the wall screen. Random partner pairings. Predator with prey. The new students reacted with the same shock and protest that Danny's original class had shown. Danny watched from the back of the room as Tylee and Kresh handled the protests with patient explanations. They shared their own experiences, showed what cooperation had taught them, offered themselves as proof that change was possible. Then Kresh walked to the door. His hand hovered over the lock control. He looked at the students with his predatory eyes and saw the same fear.